Hello, everyone. Joining me on PAWAN LUTHRA podcast is Barry O'Farrell, former Premier of New South Wales and then High Commissioner of Australia to India from 2020 to 2023. For the past 11 months, Barry has been working with the University of Sydney as a special advisor to Vice-Chancellor Mark Scott in matters relevant to the university's education, research and diplomatic endeavours with India. Welcome, Barry.
Pleasure to be back.
Barry, before we start, India was plunged into profound grief following the passing away of much-loved Ratan Tata. You presented him with an Order of Australia in April 2023. Can you talk us through your interactions with the great Ratan Tata?
I remember my first visit to India back in 2010. I got to meet him when he was much younger, before he became Emeritus Chair. And from that moment on, whenever I was there on delegations, or as I know, other Australians were there, he always made himself available until the last few years. And in fact, the last time I saw him prior to providing the honour was at Vibrant Gujarat in 2017 when we both sat on the panel together. But he was a wonderful person, and I got the chance to present him on behalf of the Australian Government and the Governor-General with an Honorary Order of Australia, recognising everything he'd done for the Australia-India relationship. And as we were talking, and he was frail, but he was alert. His chairman, Chandra, had just flown in from the United States, and when told what was happening, decided that he'd come along as well. It was in Sir Ratan Tata's home with dogs. And I got talking to him and asked how often he'd come to Australia. And of course, because of the interests of the group, he'd been to Australia a number of times. But he told me something that I didn't know, and I don't think anyone else knew, which was that in 1973, he lived and worked in Sydney for a number of months. Apparently, the company was trying to show him different parts of the world, different opportunities. And from what he said, he was working for Dalgety's, which of course was that large stock station and other company that existed in Australia. I asked him where he was living when he worked in Australia, and he said, I was at a beachside suburb, so I went through all the beaches and I worked out it was Manly, which meant, as I said to him, you caught the ferry to work each day. He said, I did.
Right.
I did. And I said, where were the offices? And he said, I don't remember, but they were near the Wentworth Hotel. Now this is a long time. This is
40 years.
This is 50 or so years after he's done this, and there was nothing wrong with that mind. And it was a great story, and I think it's and he remembered the year because it was the year the Opera House was opened, and he went to Singapore to work after that.
So Ratan Tata could have surfed on Manly Beach?
He could have surfed on Manly Beach. He was an extraordinary individual, and whether in Australia or India, it's hard for people who have succeeded in commerce to be respected and trusted.
True. Barry, now talking about yourself, you moved from politics to being a diplomat, and now you're in the area of education advisory. Your favorite quote, which I have read a number of times, and you did say it when we last spoke, I'm not a trained diplomat, but a recovering politician. In your new role, do you not bring all your skills of politics and being a diplomat as you chart the new territory of education?
Well, I think all of us, as we progress in whatever career path line we have, take things from previous encounters with us. We take the things normally that work. We try and avoid the things that don't work, and that's been useful. Firstly, in relation to the line I use with every meeting in India, what it did was relax people.
Yes.
It also meant that if I asked what any other diplomat would assume was an impertinent question, they were less likely to take offence because they probably thought he doesn't know what he's saying. But what was interesting was that 9 times out of 10, I'd get an answer. And so my colleagues...
Did you make it a habit of asking impertinent questions?
Well, the longer we got there, towards the end, there was no question that I thought was off limits, including asking the president of one of the major political parties what his party would do to try and end the terrible communalism that was providing negative publicity for India around the world.
So what are the impertinent questions you're asking now in your new role?
Yeah, the older, you'll understand this, Paul, when you get about 20 years older. The older you get, the more impatient you are.
Yes.
Because you don't have necessarily as long as you had when you were in your 30s. And so I think you interrogate ideas, concepts, proposals far better than you do when earlier in careers.
So let me get back to asking you an impertinent question. International students bring in about $30 billion annually. It's Australia's fourth largest industry. But the federal government has cracked down on these numbers on the premise that this will help manage the housing crisis. Will it?
I think that's a non sequitur. In other words, I think there is no connection between overseas tertiary students and Australia's housing crisis. So look, Jason Clare is doing a tremendous job in working with universities to try and ensure that they continue to prosper and to provide good services, not just for Australian citizens, but for overseas students who have bounced back after COVID, which was an issue that we were concerned about. And you know, universities are a significant contributor to both the national economy but also to state economies. And during COVID, they had a difficult time, not just because of the loss of students, but also because some of the state governments and federal government provided them with no support to try and keep overseas students safe, fed and housed. And I know that's what all the universities endeavour to do. So I don't understand really why you'd seek to put a cap on something that is going well.
But this is coming from both sides of politics, Barry.
I'm disappointed, Pawan, because I thought that during COVID, even though I was out of the country, visited twice for 2 weeks, a week each, that we finally understood that without backpackers, without migrants, without holiday makers, without people that visited Australia, we couldn't do all the jobs that are needed to be done here. Now, I thought that might have been a great opportunity to reset Australia's immigration narrative that emphasised what we all know, which is that migration is good for Australia. It promotes economic growth, and it has people, whether they're Pacific Islanders or whether they're people from India and other places, doing jobs that Australians can't fill or don't want to fill. But we haven't done that, and instead, regrettably, from my perspective, we're running the same hoary old lines that I think are untrue in order to cover policies that are controversial, instead of arguing for those policies on the policy's merits. One is that overseas students are preventing Australian sons and daughters getting into university. That's not true. And secondly is the line you've said is that overseas students coming into Australia contributing to the housing crisis. Well, look around at the buildings that have gone up in the city, servicing UTS, servicing Sydney, servicing New South Wales universities, and their student accommodation blocks didn't exist before I went to India in 2020. And I think universities are doing it well.
So Barry, a couple of follow-up questions. Number one is, how detrimental is this entire debate, blaming it all on students, is to Australia's image overseas, especially in India?
Firstly, I think the good news is that because the rules around overseas students apply to students from any country, I don't think India or any country feels as though they've been singled out. Because beyond the university admission, of course, there's always been visa control, and from time to time, many countries have had issues there, but we've sorted them out. So I don't think it's a problem, and I think the quick bounce back of overseas students to Australia since COVID has ended demonstrates that the quality of universities in Australia are well known, and the opportunities that students from many countries, including India, want when they're studying, which is for part-time work, are also still available. So I think it's not going to affect it in that way. My worry is that redistributing, as we've already seen reports, starts to affect the internal economy or finances of the universities, and we don't want universities to struggle.
So there is a report which says that it decreased university revenues by about $1.1 billion. How would we see these flow-on effects?
If your receipts are down, you can't keep spending at the same levels. And of course, universities, like any other businesses, are constantly trying to update the quality of the product they're delivering, the way they deliver the product, and the facilities that they have. But as I say, I am a great admirer of Jason Clare's, and I'm sure that he will get us through it. But I think if I'm confused and struggle to see the rationale for it, I think the public will share some of those concerns.
Barry, now I'm coming on to the Australia-India relationship. ACTA was signed about 3 years ago. CICA, or the FTA, is still to be agreed upon. With China back from the cold freeze, has the opportunity been lost in cementing the Australia-India ties, which you so well set up a few years ago?
I don't think so, and I think what we need to recognise is that in countries like Australia and India, which are democracies, elections occasionally get in the way. And so we always knew in relation to this year's Indian election that if we didn't get the seeker done by the start of this year, it was unlikely to happen because the Indian election is the biggest voting exercise in the world, and regrettably that's what's happened. The challenge now, of course, PAWAN, is that we're due an election in May of next year.
Yes.
But I think the good thing is that Australia has had an open, free trading system under both governments for many decades. Whereas Prime Minister Modi was rekindling something that Congress had done in '91 but moved away from. So I'm still optimistic about it. The good news is Piyush Goyal visited recently. Look, we know he's a natural enthusiast, but he always takes it to a new level.
Right.
It's like a cyclone, but his message is always the same.
Right.
We want to do this deal.
Fantastic. Other than ABC, there is no mainstream media which has an India desk. Does this lack of in-depth media coverage of India-related issues concern you? And what can be done to improve it?
I'm not sure about the latter, PAWAN, because I came back for a week in 22 and I came back for a week before, the year before. And both times I engaged with editors of the major Australian newspapers to raise my concerns about the lack of India coverage. India's share of GDP is about the same as China's was when China started the takeoff with Australia. I'm old enough, benefits of age, is to know that at that stage there was a lot of coverage in newspapers, the Financial Review, the Australian, the Herald, the Telly, on the opportunities in India. I don't see that much, and I haven't seen it change much in Australia. In fact, the last time I did the circuit with the editors, I brought them a list of, and you'll know some of these people, columnists in India, retired professors, academics, diplomats, who willingly write stories about what's happening in India today, economically, defence, strategically, and who shouldn't affect the economics of newspapers in Australia because they'll do it for nothing. But we're still not seeing as much, and I think that's a shame because what I increasingly see worldwide is stories written outside of India by The Guardian in England, by the New York Post or the Washington Post or the New York Times, by people who are of Indian origin, but many of whom haven't been to India for years, and some of them have a particular, as they're entitled to, a particular view about the government of India. I'd like to see more reporters on the ground in India, and it's good that the ABC's still there to report directly on what's happening.
Right. The Sikh genocide Remembrance Day is being organised in Canberra, the Great Hall, Parliament House. Your views on that?
Well, historically things have happened, but if we're going to celebrate or commemorate occasions, we also need to be truthful about what went on and what followed. And look, all countries have scars in their history, and certainly that period in India and the period following Indira Gandhi's death have left enormous scars. I've been to the Gurdwara in Delhi. I've seen the photographs up on the wall of politicians they describe as murderers. It is quite confronting. But many countries have had events that they're not proud of. But if you are going to commemorate them, to be honest and truthful.
How do they do that?
Well, that's for other people to determine. I'm not going to start telling anybody in this country how they should organise the... Look, we still struggle around Australia Day and how we embrace our Indigenous people in Australia Day. What I think we've at least learned is that you can't lock them out. You can't ignore them, and you shouldn't ignore them. And so you've got to find a way.
Barry, I know you love your cricket. Your thoughts on the upcoming season?
Head of Cricket Australia is Mike Baird, my treasurer. He's a very good treasurer. He knows money, he knows figures. He knows a 5-test series with India versus Australia will be the biggest turn for Cricket Australia of any test series ever. Why wouldn't we want that to happen? Look, it'll be a great games, because Prime Minister Modi says we're fierce rivals on the field, but fast friends off the field. I'm Australian. I'll support Australia. I often joke that every other year you have the Australian miracle where Indians support the Australian team often when the other subcontinental country is playing Australia.
Fair enough. Thank you very much, Barry.
Pleasure.
Thank you for joining us.